Was Israel powerless to stop Hamas's terror theater, and did it achieve its aims? Hi, I'm Hanan Lischinsky. Welcome to an All Israel News update, where today we'll talk about the terror theater, as it has been dubbed, which Hamas put on surrounding the release of 4 Israeli hostages last weekend from the Gaza Strip. The 4 female soldiers, all of them 19 or 20 years old, were captured on October 7 from an IDF outpost near the border in Nir Oz. They were unarmed. The army failed to properly protect them, and Hamas terrorists overran their post and took them into the Gaza Strip. After Israel and Hamas agreed on a ceasefire deal that included the release of 33 of the hostages that are still being held in Gaza, last weekend was the turn of these 4 hostages. Now, the whole release of them was surrounded by lots of discussions. Hamas violated the agreement by releasing them before the civilian hostages that are still remaining in Gaza, but we will not get into that. We'll focus on this huge show that Hamas put on surrounding their release. They took a partly destroyed but partly not destroyed square in Gaza City. They cleared the square. They put armed guards all around it, masked and uniformed Hamas fighters, so-called. All of a sudden, they did have their uniforms on, which they didn't do over the past months of fighting, where they blended into the civilian surroundings in the Gaza Strip. And of course, Hamas put a stage, a large stage in the middle of these ruins, and intended to humiliate these Israeli soldiers before releasing them. They put on this huge show, which was meticulously choreographed and filmed by multiple cameras from different angles. There were drones in the air. It was a live stream on several Arabic news channels. And Hamas really invested a lot of resources and effort into creating this huge spectacle surrounding the release of these 4 young Israeli soldiers. Hamas's aim and the message they intended to send was clear. The past year and a little bit of war, of devastation that the IDF created in Gaza, Hamas said did not hurt it, did not bring it to its knees. Hamas is still there. Hamas is still in control. And Hamas is able to still put on these huge shows, and even though it has to release the hostages, can still humiliate and parade them in front of the world live on television. Israel's enemies here in the region actually have a long tradition of these kind of displays. In a longer piece that I wrote earlier and that you can read here if you want, I went into detail showing how several of Israel's enemies over the years have tried to claim victory, put on great shows. Egypt even has a whole museum dedicated to one of its military defeats. And despite, as I said, despite being defeated militarily, Israel's enemies have often tried to claim and try to show victory, and in this way, through a propaganda victory, snatch really victory from the jaws of a military defeat. Now, it's important to remember that when we're considering these kinds of issues of propaganda, of enemies losing face in defeat, and all of these issues that can be very complicated and difficult to talk about, I just think it's important to remember that Israel is not a completely Western society. So when we see these kinds of shows that Hamas puts on, Hamas knows very well what it accomplishes in Israeli society. So in the aftermath of this show, there were many in Israel who were provoked and angry about these displays of victory, despite the IDF's military victory in all engagements over the past months. Therefore, many in Israel were also angry. There were people that were interviewed in media outlets, journalists, opinion commentators, who asked the important question of whether Israel's government prepared for this show, knew about the show beforehand, and tried to prevent it in some kind of way. Because as it looked, as it came out in all of the media coverage, and again, as I said, live coverage throughout the Arabic world and the broader world, of course, it looked like Hamas could claim victory without Israel doing anything against it. In my opinion, the first question one has to ask here is whether Israel's PR departments, especially those in the IDF, maybe, if there was anybody who really thought about this. It's important, of course, to remember that for Israel, the most important thing is the hostages coming home. And it's very possible, I think, in this government and in the army, that people really didn't think about or consider the way that the hostages would be released, but only were happy to see the hostages released. And also the previous times that hostages were released, Hamas didn't put on that big of a show, so it's possible that the Israeli government and the army were not prepared for this. The other possibility is, of course, that the Israeli government was expecting something like this, maybe even through intelligence information knew about the preparations for this, and for whatever reason couldn't do anything to stop it. I do think it's worth mentioning here that once again, in these negotiations, despite the US government having changed to a more friendly government with the Trump administration, once again it seems like Hamas really doesn't feel the pressure, or at least it doesn't show being susceptible to any kind of pressure. And it seems like Israel was once again the party that was being pressured to agree to this government. And the consequence of this is that we see that Israel cannot take any action to prevent this kind of spectacle surrounding and humiliation ritual surrounding its hostages. And on the other hand, Israel also couldn't really react and punish Hamas for violating several other of the agreement's terms so far. Basically, every other day there is some kind of report that Hamas is violating one or the other of all of those terms. It seems to me that Israel does not have the leverage or doesn't dare put more pressure on Hamas, fearing that the deal will break apart and the hostages will stay in Gaza. And this, unfortunately, again shows that Israel wants this deal more than Hamas. It seems like Israel is in the weaker negotiating position. And I already talked about this in a previous video that you can click on here. Israel really wants the hostages back and is ready to pay huge prices. But I do want to end this video on a more positive note, because despite Hamas's successful show, you could say, despite this terror theater, this huge spectacle that they put on, here in Israel, over the past couple of days, all we talked about was the bravery, the composure, and the backbone that these 4 young women showed during these trials. Despite Hamas trying to put them on, they did put them on stage, and they actually wanted them to speak. Apparently, the hostages learned Arabic during their time in captivity, but as we now know from reports, they did not want to speak. They resisted Hamas trying to put them on stage and have them give a victory speech, and instead they waved, they smiled, and they really showed to Hamas, to the Gazans before them in the crowd, and to the whole world that they were not broken by captivity. These 4, as I said, 20-year-old women just put on a huge display of bravery in the face of evil. And as I said, despite Hamas putting on this show, ultimately it failed. The message did not get through the intended message. And here in Israel, all of Israel really talked about the bravery of these young women. And I think this really symbolizes the spirit of this country, the spirit of this society that will not be broken, even though it might suffer some setbacks during the war. Even 4 20-year-old young women could inspire a whole nation in this way. Here at All Israel News, we will continue to follow the story of these 4 brave hostages, freed hostages, as well as all the other hostages that still remain in Hamas captivity in Gaza. And if you want to follow us, you can leave a like here on this video. You can follow us here on this YouTube channel, on allisrael.com, and all our other social media channels.